This last weekend, I was in a lovely little town down in Tejas known as Houston, which many people from around Houston lovingly refer to as the armpit of Texas. I liked it, but apparently I was alone in that capacity, and the reason I was down in this tiny little backwater village was because I was there for an event called Comicpalooza, which is like Comic-Con, just in the most humid and hot place on earth. And while I was there to speak on panels and inform the masses about how to become a YouTuber, Naruto, and Hunter x Hunter, I was also there to hang out with fans and apparently answer their questions. Because boy oh boy, did I get a lot of questions asked to me. And rather somewhat unsurprisingly, the most common questions I got revolved around JJK chapter 261, but immediately after 261, as it had literally just come out and I had literally just made a video about it, somewhat surprisingly, the second most common thing I was asked about was Kaguya. In fact, I was asked 3 to 4 times by 3 to 4 separate people if I believed Kaguya was going to return to Boruto in some capacity. And not only was I asked whether or not Kaguya would make her return in Boruto, I was also asked to cover her more in depth. In fact, some people went so far as to say that I should do a you-know-nothing about Kaguya, and I genuinely didn't know the fan base was so feverish for more Kaguya content. I feel like Kaguya in the Naruto fandom is a bit like the prequels in the Star Wars fandom. Everyone hated her when she came out, but now that it's been a couple of years, people are looking back fondly, even asking if and yearning for the possibility of her coming back into the story. And as somebody who was reading weekly manga releases when Kaguya was revealed and saw the fallout online over her reveal, this is about as wild as a plot twist as I could have ever possibly imagined. But I believe I might have something to do with it, because admittedly, I do kind of enjoy Kaguya as a character, and I think it would be really cool if she came back. Which is why today I want to dedicate a whole video to Kaguya, because apparently that's what the people want. And thus today, I not only want to talk about how you know nothing about Kaguya, but I also want to talk about the possibility of her return to Boruto and how narratively and plot-wise, it might make a fair amount of sense. See, because one of the biggest talking points on this page, especially recently, has been the controversy revolving the retcons between Naruto and Boruto, and how they may not actually be retcons in the first place. And when you actually dig deep into Kaguya's backstory and use the information that we now have from Boruto to build out the true comprehensive idea of what Kaguya's time on Earth looked like, the idea of her coming back actually becomes substantially more likely. See, because the more you understand Kaguya, the more likely it seems as though she might help in the final battle against Shibai, which I'm aware sounds insane considering the fact this is the woman who once tried to destroy Earth in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, but I don't think her story's done quite yet. And thus today, we're trying to figure out a way to continue that very same story. Because today, we're talking you know nothing about Kaguya. But before we get to telling you how much you don't know about this certain character, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me telling you things you don't know about anime and manga, you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. And if you still love the idea of me talking about anime and manga, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So before we get into all that, today we're gonna talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Factor. Factor is an absolute must for you this summer, as Factor allows you to fuel up fast on dietitian-approved, absolutely delicious meals that only take 2 minutes to get ready. And in these warm, sunny months, as some of us emerge from our winter caves, the idea of being stuck in grocery stores or the kitchen cooking up lunch or dinner is just not the play. But Factor offers so much more than just these delicious dietitian-approved and never-frozen meals, as they also offer snacks, smoothies, and so much more. They provide you with a wide variety of easy options for your day, whether that be breakfast, midday bites, or anything else. And let me just tell you, Factor plays a massive role in my life. As somebody who runs 3 YouTube channels and is in the process of making a 4th, I don't have hours to spend thinking about what I'm gonna eat and preparing it. But at the same time, fitness and health is massively important to me, which is why Factor's fresh, never frozen, dietitian approved, and delicious meals are huge for me. But there's a big difference between telling and showing. So let's head down to the kitchen and show you just how delicious these meals are. Today we're making some creamy Parmesan chicken. And making a Factor meal is as easy as taking that slide off, poking a couple of holes in our foil here, and throwing this meal in the microwave for a grand total of 2 minutes. And now for the all-important taste test. Somehow that chicken is still incredibly juicy, it's well seasoned,
It's perfect.
Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code NCHammer2350 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next box. That's code NCHammer2350 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. It's time to take back your time. So Kaguya Otsutsuki, the first wielder of chakra on Earth, the mother of ninjadom as we know it today, one of the most iconic and polarizing characters in all of Naruto, widely blamed as the character that ruined Shippuden, and now yet a character that the entirety of the fan base is yearning to have back. So how does that happen? And if Kaguya was to return to the fold, what would that look like? Well, before we can answer those questions, let's go over who Kaguya was as a character. And by going over her history and better understanding who she was in the fold of Naruto's universe, we can possibly find the most logical and fun way to fit her back into Boruto's story. See, because while Kaguya is viewed as a maniacal earth-eating monster by the majority of the Naruto fandom, she is genuinely anything but that. That is, of course, if you want to believe the story we were told in Naruto. See, because for as divisive a character as Kaguya is, she is equally mysterious. And thus, for anybody to claim that they know everything there is to know about Kaguya is probably a bit of a stretch. Unless, of course, you're talking about me, because I know everything. Has never ever been wrong. So in order to give us the best possible footing to theorize about Kaguya's possible return to Boruto, let's first crack into who she was as a character. That is to say, let's start this video off in the way that we tend to start these kinds of videos off, at the beginning. See, Kaguya's story is genuinely the first historical marker we have in the entirety of the Naruto universe's timeline. And while sure, Shibai and his lower probably came to Earth prior to Kaguya and Isshiki, we just don't know that yet. And thus when I say we're starting at the beginning, I genuinely mean we're starting at the beginning. See, 2,000 years ago, Kaguya and Isshiki were sent to Earth to cultivate a god tree, and to harvest this god tree, thus creating a chakra fruit, which she was actually supposed to present to the main family of the Otsutsuki clan. See, this is actually a piece of information that was relayed to us in an anime canon episode in Boruto, specifically episode 55. And thus it's not entirely certain if the chakra fruit that Kaguya and Isshiki were going to make on Earth was going to be given to Isshiki or back to the main branch family on whatever planet the Otsutsukis live on. However, that's not necessarily important when discussing Kaguya's history. What is important is the context of Kaguya and Ishiki's relationship. See, because as to whether or not the chakra fruit was supposed to go to Isshiki or the main branch family doesn't really matter to Kaguya, because within the confines of her Otsutsuki duo, she was the lower ranking one, meaning that Kaguya would be sacrificed to the Ten Tails in order to grow Divine Tree and a chakra fruit. Now, there's really no way for us to know for sure as to whether or not this would have been Kaguya's first time being sacrificed to the Ten Tails or her 1,000th time. However, when we consider the fact that both Momoshiki and Isshiki are members of the main branch family, and Isshiki is undoubtedly stronger than Momoshiki, and Momoshiki told us that strength comes from the cultivation of divine trees and chakra fruits, then it's safe to assume that Isshiki has consumed more chakra fruits than Momoshiki, who's consumed about 13. And thus it's pretty safe to assume that this wasn't Kaguya's first time being fed to a Ten Tails. Thus Kaguya was very familiarized with the ideas of slowly but surely being digested by a giant ball of nature energy so somebody else can get stronger. And this is where we begin to see the first pieces of personality from Kaguya. See, because it wasn't until after Kaguya was long gone and Momoshiki and Kinshiki were introduced that we truly began to see what the dynamic looks like between a higher ranking and lower ranking Otsutsuki. See, while it was fully understood that Kinshiki would sacrifice himself to the Ten Tails that Momoshiki was trying to recreate by pulling all of the nine-tailed beasts back together, how incredibly subservient Kinshiki was to Momoshiki didn't become entirely clear until Momoshiki got put in a bind in a battle against Naruto and Sasuke and told Kinshiki to give his life to be absorbed into Momoshiki. And while there is a technical possibility that somewhere out there Kinshiki did have a karma marking on somebody, technically by being absorbed and fused with Momoshiki, Kinshiki would not only cease to exist, but would probably not reincarnate. And Kinshiki did it without a second's hesitation. And this blind loyalty from Kinshiki to Momoshiki puts Kaguya's moment of betrayal against Isshiki into even more context for us. See, this is simply just the way the Otsutsukis are supposed to function. The lower ranks are supposed to sacrifice themselves to Ten Tails and eventually become chakra fruits that the upper ranks eat until apparently the upper ranks get strong enough to become gods, at which point the lower ranks might become upper ranks. We're not entirely sure. But Kaguya, a lower ranking Otsutsuki, craved the power of the chakra fruit. She got sick of being fed to the Ten Tails. And thus, as Kaguya and Isshiki descended to Earth with the idea of creating a god tree and therefore a subsequent chakra fruit, Kaguya, instead of being fed to the Ten Tails, betrayed Isshiki. tearing him asunder into two pieces and leaving him to die. Now, unfortunately for Earth and Kawaki, this didn't work, and he survived, but Kaguya did go on to consume a chakra fruit. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit hazy in terms of things either being retconned or not. See, the way that Kaguya tells this story is that a chakra fruit in a divine tree already existed on Earth before she ever got there. But she also didn't tell us about the presence of Isshiki. Now, this gets even hazier when you consider the fact that the story of Kaguya consuming the first chakra fruit technically comes from anime filler, which the majority of the fandom treats as canon because when filler builds upon the manga, doesn't contradict it, and gives us information we didn't already have, it's hard not to take that only source of information as the true source of information. So let's go over exactly what happens in this filler arc, which tells the story of how Kaguya consumed the first chakra fruit. See, in the anime, Kaguya was discovered by the people of the land of the ancestors, which is a dumb thing to call yourself because in the current moment, it's just the land of you. Now, the villagers in the land of the ancestors were perplexed by the existence of Kaguya, one, because she appeared to descend down from the heavens, and two, because she doesn't look like a human. And thus, Kaguya was brought to the emperor of the land of the ancestors, Tenji. Now, Kaguya identified herself to Tenji and the rest of the ancestors in the land of ancestors as the god tree's guardian. However, Kaguya, possibly in the first ever time that we actually got a real peek into Kaguya's personality outside of her possibly ripping Isshiki in half, decided to, after meeting all these humans living in the land of ancestors, wipe their memories. And I find this really interesting. See, because while it's technically filler, Kaguya wiping the memories of all of the humans she met so that she could settle amongst them as a human is not only in line with what we're currently seeing in Boruto, but is also incredibly in line with how Kaguya reacted to seeing Naruto and Sasuke when she believed they were Hagoromo and Hamura. See, Kaguya, after wiping the minds of all of the humans in the land of ancestors, settled amongst them and became known as Tenji's concubine. And as Kaguya lived amongst these humans, she slowly but surely fell in love with the planet that she was meant to destroy. And a lot of that love for the planet came from her subsequent love of the emperor of the land of ancestors, Tenji. And thus, as time went on, eventually she became pregnant with twins, Hagoromo and Hamura. And it's this somewhat vital piece of information that makes most Naruto fans accept this filler as canon, because Hagoromo and Hamura are half human, though it's never stated in the manga how Kaguya gets half human children. However, this is far from the only circumstance in Naruto where filler episodes gave us a better look into the core values of a certain character than the manga ever did, because it is evident from things that happen in the manga that Kaguya did love Hagoromo and Hamura. As when she saw Hagoromo and Hamura, Naruto and Sasuke, she began to cry. And thus the idea of Kaguya having children that she raised for a pretty significant amount of time should instill into us the idea that Kaguya, somewhere deep down inside of her, has a love for the human race. And what I dislike about the retcon's approach to Kaguya's backstory is that basically the retcon takes all emotion and choice out of Kaguya's hands. They say that Kaguya descended down to earth with Isshiki, tore him asunder, fed him to a 10 tails, ate the chakra fruit, cast the world into infinite Tsukiyomi, made a white Zetsu army, and then wiped their hands of all of it. But what that retcon ideology completely ignores consistently is the existence of Hamura and Hagoromo, children who needed to be sired and raised for almost 2 decades prior to their battle against Kaguya that only lasted 3 months. The retcon explanation of Kaguya's time on Earth completely ignores the fact that there has to be 20 or so years there that she lives amongst humans. And I genuinely think the filler explanation does a better job of explaining this window of time than the retcon explanation ever could. But the peace times in the land of ancestors didn't last for long, as eventually the even dumber named land of that began to threaten the land of ancestors over a territorial dispute. And thus Tenji, the emperor of the land of ancestors, hoping to make sure a war didn't break out between these two neighboring countries, said that when representatives from the land of that came to the land of ancestors to talk about this territorial dispute, that anybody who attacked them would be executed. However, Kaguya was threatened by said representatives, being forced into a situation where she had to defend herself, at which point she used her overwhelming power to completely destroy the representatives from the land of that. But since this was essentially seen as an act of war by Kaguya against a neighboring country, Tenji was split between his loyalty to his concubine or his loyalty to his nation. And thus Kaguya and her assistant Aino were hunted down by the land of ancestors. And if you genuinely take this to be Kaguya's backstory, it makes understanding her character so much easier and so much more tragic. See, even if we take retcon information into account here, we could say that Kaguya and Isshiki descended down to Earth, and Kaguya, not wanting to be thrown into the Ten Tails once again, rallied against Isshiki, took the lower half of his body, and fed it to the Ten Tails. However, prior to consuming the chakra fruit that would destroy a large piece of humanity, Kaguya then instead decided to settle amongst the humans, which is all the more impressive when you think about it, considering the fact that Kaguya knows firsthand how much power a chakra fruit can provide an Otsutsuki, and yet she still makes the active decision to settle amongst the humans instead of immediately eating the chakra fruit. And it isn't until she's essentially betrayed by her husband and father of her children and the entire nation she settled in because she defended herself that she turns her back against humanity. But rather interestingly, she doesn't turn her back against humanity. See, Kaguya loses all faith in humanity when she's hunted down like a dog for defending herself, but she doesn't destroy humanity because of this. No, Kaguya in this moment begins longing for peace and realizes that with godlike powers, the attainment of peace would be much easier. So despite the main clan of the Otsutsuki family wanting to use Earth's chakra fruit to make itself more powerful, possibly because of its connection to Shibai, Kaguya then instead takes on the burden of making herself public enemy number one against the entirety of the Otsutsuki clan by consuming the chakra fruit on Earth. And while sure, of course, you could say that her attacking Isshiki probably did this in the first place, the core takeaway from all this, if we're using all the information we know about Kaguya, is that she jeopardized her relationship with her existing, very powerful clan in order to guide humans to peace. And thus she, as a lower-ranking Otsutsuki, consumed one of the most powerful chakra fruits of all time in order to help humanity. And in doing so, she awakes not only to chakra, but also the Rinne Sharingan. Now, there's a couple of rather interesting points in here. One, the consumption of the chakra fruit awoke Kaguya to chakra, meaning that prior to this moment, Kaguya didn't have chakra, which means inherently Otsutsukis don't have chakra until they eat a chakra fruit, which means the only real source of chakra in the entire universe that exists without consumption is nature energy, and that nature energy has to be condensed massively in order to introduce chakra to living beings, all in the form of a chakra fruit. Second important takeaway here is that Kaguya awakens the Rinne Sharingan, the only Otsutsuki to ever do so, which is a big reason why people believe that this chakra fruit that Kaguya consumed actually had the chakra and DNA of Shibai, as she was able to awaken to a dojutsu that was presumably stronger than the dojutsus that Otsutsuki who had eaten dozens of chakra fruits were able to awaken to. Now, with this newfound power, Kaguya ended all wars on Earth and essentially took control of all nations on Earth, being hailed as the Moon Princess and essentially the Queen of Earth. And for the incredibly difficult task of bringing peace to Earth, she was hailed and worshipped as the Rabbit Goddess. And after establishing peace on Earth and assuming the role of head honcho, Kaguya eventually used Infinite Tsukiyomi by opening a portal to a dimension that had a moon and bringing the moon onto Earth for a second, and then she used that Infinite Tsukiyomi to turn humans into white Zetsu. Now, I find this rather interesting because it's not necessarily in line with the Kaguya we know. See, the first thing that Kaguya did with her godlike power was create peace on Earth, even though she had given up on humanity and lost all her faith. And it wasn't until she brought peace to Earth did she start building her white Zetsu army. But the reason why Kaguya did this is because power got to her head. See, the worst thing that could have ever happened to Kaguya was her being bestowed chakra in the first place. See, deep within the soul of Kaguya, as, well, not the human, but the alien, exists a lot of empathy. Kaguya understood what it felt like to be at the bottom of the pecking order, fed to Ten Tails over and over and over again simply to make Isshiki stronger. And thus when Kaguya descended down to Earth and saw all of these people that existed below her on the pecking order, she took pity on them and decided to rally against Isshiki, stop this planet from being consumed, and live amongst those she pitied. However, in a moment of desperation, being hunted down by the people she thought loved her, she took on the burden of power in the form of chakra fruit. And just as the ancient saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. The reason that Kaguya enacted Infinite Tsukiyomi and began to build a white Zetsu army isn't because she was afraid of the Otsutsuki lying on the horizon. It was because she was afraid that those Otsutsuki would take the power she had gained from her. But the anime takes a rather interesting approach towards the creation of Kaguya's white Zetsu army. See, in the anime, Kaguya, not wanting humanity to perish, actually takes a group of humans caught in the genjutsu and breaks them out of it, wiping their memories and allowing them to live on, which is why humanity still exists today. away, that simple act of mercy. And this, while it does come from a filler episode, is genuinely the only answer we have for why humanity still exists. Because for all intents and purposes, an infinite Tsukiyomi affects everybody on Earth, and therefore the god tree would turn everybody into a white Zetsu. And thus technically, without this act of mercy from Kaguya, humanity wouldn't exist. Which could be a possible really interesting speaking point if Kaguya were to ever return to the story. Because it's moments like this that show, even though Kaguya was drowning in her desire to hold on to her power, that her love of humanity still persisted. And it was actually amongst this group of humans that survived the infinite Tsukiyomi white Zetsufication that Kaguya and her now newborn twin brothers, who were the first ever people to be born with chakra, would live out the rest of, well, at least Kaguya's life. See, because while the manga does say that Kaguya enacted infinite Tsukiyomi that allowed her to build the white Zetsu army, they never talk about why she was able to still rule over humans after that. And yet in the manga, Kaguya rules by herself and often uses cruelty in order to get exactly what she needs. And thus, while still being revered too as the rabbit goddess and the ruler of Earth by humanity, humanity now treats her with more fear than they do reverence, as she's now no longer known as the rabbit goddess, but instead a demon. But that small sliver of humanity that existed within Kaguya that allowed her to love humans enough to make sure that they wouldn't perish faded as her desire to have power grew and grew. And slowly but surely, she realized that the chakra that she dispersed to her two sons, Hagoromo and Hamura, would come back to her if she killed them. Now, of course, this plan would require that she absorbs the divine tree to re-become the Ten Tails and re-assimilate with her children by killing and absorbing them, which then led to Kaguya and her twins' subsequent 3-month battle. But here's the thing, and something that very few people know, Hagoromo and Hamura didn't know they were fighting against their mother. See, they assumed that the Ten Tails was the incarnation of the god tree, and the god tree was trying to get its chakra back by consuming them. And thus they sealed the chakra of the Ten Tails inside of Hagoromo and used the husk of the Ten Tails, the ghetto statue, as the center of their six-mass Chibaku Tensei, thus creating the celestial body of the moon, of which Hamura would soon head to as the new leader of the Otsutsuki clan, to 1, keep the Otsutsuki clan alive, and 2, keep an eye on the ghetto statue. While Hagoromo would spend the rest of his life on Earth teaching humans ninshu and how to connect through the collective unconscious. And in this way, ironically, Hagoromo embodied the ideology of his mother. See, Hagoromo walking across the earth with his godlike powers and teaching humans ninshu in order to bring peace to all nations isn't actually all that different to what Kaguya wanted prior to achieving chakra. And the most interesting through line between Hagoromo and Kaguya's stories is that while both of them wanted to achieve peace for humanity, chakra destroyed those chances. See, because while chakra corrupted Kaguya's will and her want for peace on Earth, the introduction of ninshu to humanity allowed them to access chakra, which then led to thousands of years of wars. And thus, ironically, neither Kaguya nor Hagoromo ever really imparted any good on Earth, though they both, with their almost limitless power, wanted to. And the reason why is chakra. And that's what's so interesting about Kaguya's story to me. See, because while Kaguya is viewed as a demonic overlord that tried to take over the world, her contributions to it probably in the long run did less damage than Hagoromo's. And yet she's so rarely humanized by the fandom. Even though in the war arc, when she thought she saw Hagoromo and Hamura, she broke down in tears. See, because Kaguya is more complex of a character than we give her credit for. She's not just some plot device to introduce the Otsutsukis. She's an alien who fell in love and had her heart broken by the tumultuous nature of humanity. And yet, much in line with the core values of Naruto, her heart persevered, and she strove for peace. However, much like characters like Sasuke, power slowly corrupted her, until eventually her idea of peace was so far off what she originally envisioned that by the end of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, she, in a way, welcomes being sealed again. And this is why I find the possibility of her being reintroduced into the story so compelling. See, while Kaguya returned to the Earth in the Fourth Great Shinobi World's War with the idea of gaining all of the chakra that had now seeped back into this planet, back into her body, and assuming her mantle as the God Emperor of Earth, I think if she were to hypothetically come back into the story, she would see that the nursery that was Earth had bloomed more successfully than she ever could have imagined. As not only had she created sons strong enough to seal her away, but now there was reincarnations of her sons that were strong enough to protect the planet in her stead. And remember, the core of Kaguya is the will to protect the Earth, the nursery that she finds herself responsible for. And thus, if somebody else like Momoshiki or Shibai was to threaten that Earth, she, with her love of humanity and complicated history with said planet, would have a rather compelling reason to protect said Earth. However, the fourth data book does say that she's dead. But then again, the fourth data book also says that Choji's human bullet tank attack is the strongest offensive ninjutsu on Earth. And because of this, things like Kaguya's wiki will say that she's incapacitated, not dead. And I believe the concept of Kaguya's door either being open or closed, being left ambiguous, is done purposefully. Because while the story doesn't technically need her reinserting herself into it in Boruto, for her to re-arrive in the fold of Boruto, now on the side of humanity, to protect them against the war that she brought to them, but now with humans fighting on her side instead of the white Zetsu, I believe would be an incredible twist to the end of Boruto. But as to how it would happen, I can't necessarily say, but this is where you guys come in. If Kaguya was to be reinserted into the story, how do you think it would happen? And do you think she would fight for humanity? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Listen, I'd hit